All right. So last time I did this, wasn't into a good microphone like this one. And I made a lot of promises that I didn't exactly keep. In the last one, I spoke around a lot of different topics. Listening back to myself, I realized that as soon as I get close to something I'm really not supposed to be talking about, and I'm most definitely not supposed to be posturing as having any more idea what I'm talking about than any other normal person, I would, I don't know, act traumatized and back away from it. So I would cough or choke or spit or just suddenly change subjects on myself with a new line of thinking. The thing that I kept finding myself promising and most frequently not delivering on was the promise to explain magic. I find myself drafting in my mind frequently essays and, I don't know, trying to figure out how to draft a book explaining how the liberal worldview is the black magic. They don't think of themselves as black magic. So the magical worldview of the pre-Christian Celts. And it really is. But just saying it like that is offensive to many people because there are many well-meaning and I suppose good-hearted, if dim-witted liberals who are Christian and are practicing Christians and would balk at the accusation that they're wizards of any sort, let alone that they're, pre-Christian druids of any kind of, with any kind of meaning, because they've very likely all seen The Wicker Man. Just because I waited to 2022 to see it doesn't mean that most adult people, contemporaries of mine, and frequently younger, haven't seen movies from the 70s. So if you haven't seen that movie, it's a good place to start if you're going to talk about the perception of liberals vis-a-vis magic. That movie was made in the 70s, and it's one of the most famous movies ever made. I'm really not overly concerned with spoiling it, and I'm not going to tell the whole movie, but the rough plot, the synopsis of that movie is that a cop, for whatever reason, comes to an isolated town in the UK that's in an island. I believe it's supposed to be in Scotland, but, as an American and as a non-local, it's just, non-British, right? So Irish or Welsh or Scottish, just one of those places that isn't that particular kind of British that I understand now to be Anglo-Saxon, but whatever, not in fact British at all. But anyway, he goes to this island because there are people going missing, or there's a girl that's gone missing, someone's gone missing, or for whatever reason he's investigating this island. It doesn't matter, and he finds out that the island is in bad times and that weird shit is going on, and then it turns out at the end of the movie that the island is in fact pre-Christian Celtic in their religion, and that for their summer festival they do a human sacrifice. And so the twist, or the surprise ending, right, because it's a horror movie that's been out since the 1970s, so you should have seen it coming when you turned it on, is that the cop was lured there by the mayor of the town, who happens to be that super famous guy. Anyway, he was lured there by the mayor of the town to be an unwilling or unwitting sacrifice. But I said that wrong, but I said it subtly wrong so that if you know what I'm talking about, you know how wrong I am. But if you don't know what I'm talking about, you're just waiting on me to say something that means anything to you. So let me restate that. The mayor of the town, because this town is struggling and because they're wizards, They're not Christians. The mayor specifically is a wizard. The mayor needs a willing but unwitting sacrifice to make to the gods in order for the gods to give him what he wants, which is, a thriving economy for his town. And so you're not going to get an unwitting sacrifice from within the town, and you're not going to find a willing sacrifice in the town in the context of this movie. And we'll explain all of these things. I don't know why I would refer to myself in the royal we there, but I will explain these things over and over and over again because I know that I'm not saying it right, and I don't even like how I'm saying it. But I'm talking to myself, remember? So I know these things. Just trying to mine them out. So, he's not going to find an unwitting sacrifice in town because everybody in town, because the town is so small, everyone in town that's an adult understands what's going on, and sacrificing a child when what you want is to better your economy is kind of it's like a self-defeating, or like even a self-fulfilling, it's just a self-defeating ritual. Because what you want is you want the town to thrive so that you have the town to pass on to your children. So if you go around sacrificing your children, sure, you're going to have riches, but you're not going to have a town. That's why the Romans were so appalled by the Carthaginians, for example, or why the post-Abrahamic Jews were so appalled by the Phoenicians, right? So the post-binding of Isaac Jews, the ones who knew, no, we don't sacrifice our children for future gain, were appalled by the Phoenicians who continued to sacrifice their children to guarantee future benefits from their gods. So he won't find an unwitting sacrifice in town. So what he has to do is he has to find a willing sacrifice. And the other thing that he won't find in town is a willing sacrifice, because no one is going to gladly give up their child. Because, again, you want the town to thrive because you have children, and you want something to give to your children. Because what you don't have is too much population. And I talked about this until it made me feel uncomfortable to continue talking about it, because I wasn't sure whether my evident lack of emotion and then my laughing whenever I say something that hurts my feelings or makes me scared was coming off as callous when I was talking about what Hernan Cortez and company found when they discovered the Maya. When you have too many people, well, you don't need witting or willing sacrifices. You have the sacrificial material right at hand. In fact, the reason that you have the sacrificial ritual is because you have too much population. The human sacrifice in terms of not enough population, like I said, it's counterproductive. It's counterintuitive. So when the gods demand a human sacrifice, you have to find one from outside town. And so that's low-key what the Maya were doing, right? Is they wanted their civilization to thrive, and they hadn't developed the Indo-European or Indo-Iranian conquer, eradicate, replace. So what they did is they just farmed the people outside their immediate city for sacrifices, for the blood ritual, because the gods, they're the Maya god, like, we don't talk about this, and maybe there's a good reason that we don't talk about it, because what I have noticed as a person who is not politically affiliated, I'm neither conservative nor Republican, I'm neither conservative nor Republican. I am neither conservative nor Republican, but neither am I a liberal, neither am I a Democrat. I'm not affiliated with a party. I'm not even affiliated with a political ideology, because, like I said in the last episode, I spent my 20s trying to figure out what cult I wanted to join, because I had been told up until my adulthood that what you were never supposed to do was join a cult. And so by my early 20s, I had identified politics as just cult. I mean, you don't even have to be educated. You don't even have to read the man's words to know that Karl Marx was making a cult. He was replacing Christianity with Marxism, just like outright. The man had read enough history. The man had lived recently enough to the Protestant Reformation or the Protestant revolutions, however you really want to think about it, because either is true. The man had lived close enough to those things to know their lessons. You don't think that he, being exactly who and what he was, wasn't trying to start a cult? Then why did he create Russian communism? Like, it's not his fault. I know that Lenin and Stalin and company, the Bolsheviks, etc., were key on that. But they read the Marxist, like, they read Marx, the Communist Manifesto, like, they read that like the Bible. And they thought of it as a religion. They made it the state religion, even though the state, there's not supposed to be a religion in communism. Communism is the religion, and it's intentional. Like, they did that on purpose. And I'm way off base. I don't remember why I'm talking about communism. Why I'm not politically affiliated. And so, for a long time, I identified the conservatives as just outright evil. I identified conservatism. I regarded that as just outright evil. And I regarded liberalism as, if not outright ignorant, naive. Well, it's mean or unkind to say bleeding hearts, but yeah, naive bleeding hearts. Because they don't actually want to help, and they don't actually have solutions. They just want, well, what they want is very difficult to say. That's why I've spent 12 minutes, plus another 2 hours and 18 minutes, or whatever the last episode was, just trying to say it outright. Because just trying to say it outright, A, makes you sound like a crazy person, because the college-educated people and the people with the blue hair and the piercings and the tattoos that do the drugs that tell you that, you know, no, you can live in all the ways that the conservatives tell you that you can't live and also remain healthy, are also the people that are spreading herpes throughout college campuses. So, like, anyway, they're the ones that'll cancel you, and they're the ones that'll harass you, and they're the ones that'll mail bombs to you. Because the reason I began to say this is what I have noticed as a person who's politically unaffiliated, is that college graduating people who graduate college with a liberal worldview are also the people who spent their time in college obsessed with terrorists and psychopaths. People who spent their time reading Kaczynski and watching documentaries about Manson et al. And so the liberal worldview is a sick, it's an unhealthy worldview. It's not just black in the sense that it's evil and that it's bad for you, right? It's not just smoking, which is hilarious because liberals don't want you to smoke. It's maybe it was the experience of having to work in public through all of COVID. But it's COVID. Like, it's a viral disease, being liberal. And it's a viral disease on purpose because it's black magic. And so I know that I've lost my thread, and I'm not going to listen back to this, so I won't know where to pick up the thread until I listen back to it. And so you'll get it episode later. But I talked a lot about ritual, and I never really explained what a ritual is or what a ritual does. I talked to you like you know. You may and you may not. But I'm talking to myself, and I know. So I know what I'm talking about. Doesn't make listening to it easier. So a ritual is like a routine. And you can do it once, like once a year. I mean, what the term to do something ritually means. It means to do it at the appropriate time. And it also means to do a particular thing, a particular routine at a particular time in a particular way for particular reasons. And so, like, you might say that you have a ritual for brushing your teeth because you want to keep the germs from eating your teeth. And so you have this particular set time or times that you brush your teeth every day or days, and you have this particular way that you do it because that's the effective way that it's done. And the most effective way to teach rituals is to teach them to children, and to not teach them as ritual, just to teach them as routine, because children misunderstand what routine and what discipline and what habituation, so habits, are. So children have the relationship backward because children necessarily are related to those things inversely to the way that an adult is. So I saw somebody say that routine is building good habits. And that's a child's perspective. A child thinks that routine is building the habits because as a child, you're practicing the habit. You're practicing building the habit. So you're practicing building the routine. Okay? But in fact, discipline is maintaining good habits. So it's already having the good habits. If you're discipline ed, it means that you have the good habits and you keep to them. Having discipline means that you have an aggregate of good habits in your past that you do unthinkingly. That's what discipline is. And so the journey from child to adult is habituating discipline. It's becoming discipline ed. It's habituating good habits and good routines, which means habituating good thought, good speech, and good action. And so I spent a long time talking about AAVE and about the woke community and about the Black community in general, and I didn't really offer any solution. And my solutions were implicit, in large part because I was talking to myself, and in large part because I assumed that when any Black person would hear my words, they would immediately shut me out, not just because I'm obviously white, but because I have lived and worked in majority Black communities most of my life. In fact, most of my life, I have been the only white person that I'm working with who's not a teenager because I'm working unskilled jobs. Food service mostly. And when you this isn't a Black people phenomenon. I mean, Mexicans are this way, Indians are this way, Pakistanis are this way. Like, Indian subcontinenters are terrible to deal with from a customer service standpoint, because anyone who thinks that they should know a thing who doesn't know that thing, so we were talking about like known knowns, known unknowns, unknown knowns, or known unknowns and unknown unknowns. I was wearing my best Donald Rumsfeld hat there for a while, for many hours, actually, 2 of them. We talked not comprehensively about those things, but when you know that you should know something, for instance, this wasn't even a Black person. It's not a race thing. It's not a skin color thing. Skin color has nothing to do with anything. Race has a lot to do with a lot of things. Race is not a social construct. Where you are from, your ethnicity is very real. It determines who you are. It determines how you talk. It determines how you think. It determines what you do. It sets your fate, not your destiny. Your destiny is what's behind you. Your fate's what's ahead of you. It sets your fate at birth. The place that you're born starts your story. It starts your fate. Your parents start your fate, the location that you're born, where they choose to raise you, the home that they raise you in, the community they raise you in, the schools you go to, the places that you hang out when you're not with your family, the people, all of that determines who you are before you're able to think about who you are and take the reins of that particular horse. If you're a horse person, I'm not. But I'm not a car person either, so I don't think of it like, take the steering wheel and drive or whatever. I've always walked. So, lace up your own damn shoes. Like, until you learn how to, like, until you're old enough to self-examine critically and well enough to lace up your own damn shoes, you are an animal. Like, you are driven by the exact same fate that drives my cats. Like, you're someone's pet. In other words, you're someone's responsibility, right? Someone has to feed you, someone has to clothe you, someone has to water you. Whether you realize it or not, it's often your employer. And that's why your employer hates you. It's like, you're 35 fucking years old. I should not have to tell you and remind you to wash your fucking hair before you come to work. Anyway. It's a very real thing. It's a very real thing. This arbitrary, you're 18 now, so you're an adult because that's what the law says, has been a huge detriment to this nation and to this planet. This idea of arbitrary age restrictions. And we talked about that a little bit. I never gave a reason why soldiers should be allowed to die at 18. And I mean, we all know the answer. Your body is most fit for fighting and for killing between the ages of 16 and 25. Your brain is also most plastic between those. Like, I already said it, your brain stops growing. Your brain becomes less, I think that they use the term malleable after 25. So the idea is that you do all your fighting and your killing and you get all of your trauma in by 25, and then you can retire and spend 25 to the rest of your life in leisure. That's why they give you a college degree basically for free. They're like, hey, you fought and killed people, here's a college degree. Because, and this is so off topic from magic, but our worldview is a classical, late Greek, Roman, senatorial worldview. We think of ourselves as the inheritors not of imperial Rome and not of post-Spartan conquest of Athens, Greece. We think of ourselves as Golden Age, as the inheritors of Golden Age Greece, of Plato and Xenophon, and I don't feel like naming all of them that I can think of because I don't feel like taking the time. But the height of Alexander and Socrates, and not Socrates, but Aristotle, like the height, the golden age of Greek Athenian culture. And I'm aware that Alexander is Macedonian. But also, we consider ourselves the inheritors of pre-Julius Caesar Rome. So we think of ourselves as the children of these two worldviews, these two ideologies, these two cultures. And it's not that they're incompatible. The one conquered the other, and then the other dominated the other. So Rome, that senatorial Rome, conquered Greece, but Greece's culture overwhelmed and dominated post-senatorial Rome. So, I mean, it is what it is. I don't remember why I was talking about them. I was talking something about their worldview and how it's ours. But the liberal worldview is a pre-Christian worldview. It's what I'm here to talk about. I'm trying to talk about how the liberal and the woke worldviews are pre-Christian worldviews. They're antiquated, they're old, they're wrong. So what is magic? Fine. I abandoned discussing ritual. What is magic? Magic is very simply defined as believing that you can change reality. That through ritual or through thought, speech, and action, you yourself can materially change reality. So if reality is for everyone a dream, the wizard is awake, and the wizard is able to materially change the dream like a lucid dreamer. So, as I intimated badly, I don't think that's true. As I said last time, woke, the woke ideology and the AAVE language or worldview or frankly religion is, it's a claim to be a lucid dreamer. It's a claim that your claims can materially change reality. And see, it's not a claim to the outside world that your claims can change material reality. It's a claim, and it's a demonstration to the interior community that your claims can and frequently do change reality. Because if you lived in the 1970s and then you fell asleep Rick Van Winkle style and woke up today, you would say that the situation for black people is so materially and radically different that it would have to be magic to explain it. It would require magic in order for this to be the outcome. Because this is not what they fought and they died for. Because I patriotically and almost poetically waxed about my ancestors, the ancestors of anyone who lives in or is if you live in this country, your ancestral heritage, the heritage of this country is people who fight and die to right wrongs, to right injustices. See, I talk about pre and post-Christian, and I talk about the Protestant Reformation, and I talked about fighting for freedom, but the Christians before the Protestant Reformation did not fight and die for what they believed to be injustices, against what they believed to be injustices, for what they thought were freedoms or what they thought were better goods. What they did was they protested and then they died. And then eventually the greater power got tired of killing them, a la the English Empire vis-a-vis the Indian people, and change happened. But you see, the people of this United States, their ancestors said, no, we're going to fight. Your cultural heritage is of people who fight. And so the people that fought for the Civil War, the people that fought and died on bridges and all over this country, whether they fought back or whether they allowed themselves to be brutally murdered in the Christian fashion, doesn't matter, because they fought. And what they fought and what they died for was not AAVE. It was to be Americans. It was to be equal. It was to be white. It was for no distinction of ethnicity based on the color of your skin. I mean, goddamn, Martin Luther King Jr. couldn't have been more explicit about that. That the content of your character matters so much more than the color of your skin, because the color of your skin dictates nothing. All these statistics, if you're this skin color, you're more likely to be accused of crime wrongfully, has nothing to do with the color of your skin, and has everything to do with your language. The language that you use and the ritual way in which you engage in the world. It has everything to do with the way that you speak, with the way that you dress, and with the way that you engage others. And what I'm talking about is a general lack of respect for our basic surroundings. That is what it is to be poor. Like, that's what Gran Torino is about. It's not about this old guy who doesn't like Chinese people or Koreans, I think they are in that movie, right? It's about not being poor. And the way that you stop being poor, the first place that you start is that you stop having a slave mindset. And the slave mindset is that it doesn't matter because I'm a slave. And you can't escape slavery. Because even if you escape slavery, you're still on the run. You're still hiding from something. So even if you become... I'm trying to think of a famous slave who escaped slavery and while on the run also became like a famous athlete or a famous performer or a famous politician. But those things happened. But you spend the whole time with that specter at your back. You don't want to escape your slavery. You don't want to escape poverty. Escape means there's a captor behind you. No. You want to elevate. You want to climb that. It's not a ladder. We talked about this. It's a pole. It's an elevator. It's a tower. It's a pyramid. It's a hill. A mountain. You have to climb to a better spot. And for some people, you have to descend to a better spot. Like, just because I'm very, very, very poor, like, the answer for most historical rich people has been to become a hermit. And there's a good reason for that, the whole becoming a hermit thing. And it's not glorious, actually. It's not something that we should pat them on the back for as modern people, because the real reason that they just said fuck it and gave up all their money, all of their land, and became a hermit was there were multiple reasons. The cynical reason that they did all of that was to retire, because being rich in the ancient world didn't mean being rich like what non-rich people think being rich is in the modern world. It wasn't sailing around on the equivalent of first century yachts, and it wasn't going on, well, I know that I just said yachts, but and pleasure cruise is the same thing, but I'm thinking pleasure cruise like on a like a land cruise, like cruising around, because they didn't have cars to cruise around in. But it wasn't that. It wasn't Victorian being rich. It wasn't that. It wasn't the British Empire. It wasn't what you think you know about France. Like, being rich in the classical world was a huge amount of responsibility, and it was a huge amount of risk. Not just risk from the people who were also rich who wanted your riches, which was risky. That's why rich people had to have private armies. Not just in the classical world. I mean, we're talking clear up until the Victorian world, basically. But it was a huge amount of responsibility, because you owned a huge amount of human lives. You were responsible for a huge number of human lives. So your time was spent mostly dealing with disasters. And so that's why they would stamp their names real big on public buildings. Because, yeah, I paid for that public building, but I also paid to keep everybody in this city alive for the last 30 years. And so when they retired to be turnip farmers or whatever, I believe it was cabbage farming, that was popular. When you retired to become a cabbage farmer, where does the turnip farmer come from? Why do I have that in my head? Retiring to become a turnip farmer. That's a meme, or that's an old meme. I mean, that's a meme from like the middle of the 20th century. What's that from? Anyway, whenever you would retire to become a cabbage farmer, it was you retired and you gave up all of your riches and you gave up all of your public offices and you gave up all of your public esteem, quite literally and quite purposefully. to not have to manage all those lives anymore, just to manage the lives of your cabbage. Not even to manage the lives of your children. And that brings me to the other most often reason that rich people would give up their wealth and become hermits or move out and become cabbage farmers, or in the post-Christian era become Christian monks, was they were forced into retirement by their children. That's not a phenomenon you see a lot of today. You don't see a lot of children like of Warren Buffett's, like Warren's Buffett, I think that sounds better. But people like Warren Buffett, you don't see like their children forcing them into retirement and into handing over all of their wealth. In large part, I think, because our tax system might prevent that. We might have it set up so that if you do that, you lose a lot of it, like as the inheritor, if you force that sort of retirement. And it doesn't really matter, because that has absolutely nothing to do with magic and with ritual. And so I was talking about magic and I was talking about ritual, and those are sort of what I want to talk about. And those are what I feel like I left the most unchewed meat on that bone, as they say. They don't say it that way. I made it grotesque. The Wicker Man isn't where I wanted to start, and it's not what I wanted to talk about. But the willing sacrifice, I think I left off when I was being most cromulent. I think I left off at the willing sacrifice. So a witting sacrifice is like those sacrifices atop the pyramid in Central America with the Maya. They know what's happening. Not all of them are willing, but they know what's happening. And then an unwitting sacrifice is like the cop. And so, but he's willing. See, he has to be willing, though. He can be unwitting. He can know that he can not know that he's going to a sacrificial pyre, because he'll figure it out. But he has to go willingly, or it won't taste as good to the god, basically. That's just basically what it breaks down to. If he goes, honestly, it's a psychosexual thing, and you can figure that out on your own, because we're not really supposed to talk about that kind of content on YouTube, and I can understand why. I can't prevent children from getting this, and I don't want to mature tag it, because my language isn't so foul that it deserves a mature tag until I start talking about psychosexuality and, the R word, and and about ritual practice of that sort. Becomes too graphic. But now that you're thinking about it, I can talk about it a little bit without talking about it. And so when the god comes to take you, the god prefers that you are at least willing to be there, because being consumed in that way by a god, either by fire or by the way that I'm intimating with alien invasion, that is what it means to be terrified. Like, that's what terror is. Terror is engaging in that sort of behavior. That's what the word means. That's what the feeling is. To be terrorized, means to have passed that liminal barrier between reality and the dream, and to have interacted with the dream in a way that the dream interacts and proves to you that it's intelligent. That's what a god is, like a lowercase god is. And so that's what these people, liberals, that I've been talking about, that's what they want to feed your children to, because they're practicing a pre-Christian, pre-Abrahamic faith. The only thing is, they They want your children to be alive until it's inconvenient. I thought that there was more sentence to that, but there's not, so I said it funny. That's why I laughed. That's not a funny thing to say. Because they can't practice ritual baby sacrifice. They can't, not in public, not and let you know it, not and tell you that's what they're doing. So like, I'm double talking. I'm talking about magic, and I'm talking around abortion and contraceptive and gender transition. Because they all have significantly older antecedents in ritual magic, ritual pagan magic, than I think even people who participate in those sort of ideologies or those worldviews or those psychosexual dramas appreciate, because like the whole twin soul thing or whatever, that's not real. But men believing that if they ascend to the height of the warrior cult and then to the highest heights of the goddess cult and then again to the highest heights of the I don't really know how to describe it. The men's magic cult. That's being thrice great. And to be thrice great is to be a living God. And so when the ancient people said that women can't be deity, what they mean is that like they can't become thrice great because they can't ascend through the warrior cult. So to be a woman, your greatest religious aspiration was to become a man through the men's magic cults, and that's what Peter and Jesus are talking about in the one non-canonical book, when Jesus asks, or when Peter, I think it's Peter, asks Jesus why he kisses Mary on the mouth. Doesn't he know she's a woman and she can never make it into the kingdom of heaven because she's not a man? And Jesus says, well, neither are you a man. So until you become a man in the same way that she can become a man, neither of you can make it into heaven. That's what he's talking about. He's talking about male magic. And male magic is low-key astronomy and mathematics, but it's mostly the grammar of speaking properly and being polite. It's basically when Jesus says you can't become thrice great, or when Hermes Trismegistus says you can't become thrice great, basically what they're saying is you can't become thrice great until, low-key, like what Jordan Peterson does in fact say that you have to make yourself a monster, but he's ripping off Carl Jung, and Carl Jung is sucking at the teat of Celtic paganism so tight that the two are indistinguishable. So, like, before you go calling yourself a rabbi, maybe understand that your sensei is a druid, and that those two people historically were at blood feud. If you like Jordan Peterson, or if you are in fact Jordan Peterson, or maybe you're the Daily Wire listening to this, thinking to yourself, maybe that guy's a fucking fraud. What was I talking about? Magic. Keep it to magic, because see, magic, as a practitioner of magic, you don't actually have to change reality, is what I'm telling you. You're telling people that you can change reality, but you don't need to change reality, right? Like, we all know magicians with card tricks, coin tricks, etc., like the floating, the yada yada yada, that they're tricks, right? They're tricks, right? They're not tricks, Michael. Tricks are something hookers do for money, right? They're illusions, right? Well, magic, that particular magic that Aleister Crowley spelled with a K, that magic that we've been talking about, that magic is not an illusion until it is an illusion, and it's mostly an illusion. You don't actually need to materially change reality for reality to materially change. That's what I was talking about. I was talking about if you Rip Van Winkle from the 1970s to the 2020s, you would be in for a fucking culture shock, and you would be hugely disappointed in what black people have done with themselves in that time span. And the reason is magic. See, you don't have to actually make someone worthless in order for them to believe that they're worthless. All you have to do is make them believe that they're worthless, and then they will make themselves worthless for you. You don't actually need someone to be dependent on you for them to be dependent on you. You make them believe that they're dependent on you, and they will make themselves dependent on you for them. Rather for you. And so, if you listen to Jordan Peterson or you're into pop psychology, suddenly you're thinking about the devouring mother, and you're looking and you're like, is he trying to say that AAVE and religion as such is a devouring mother? And you're goddamn right I am. Because what I was telling you is, as a person who's worked in customer service in largely black communities, I can tell you that what you absolutely cannot do is suggest that a black woman, whether she's of age to be a mother or has children in fact or not, might not know something. Because you can't suggest to mother that mother might not know something. Not to the devouring mother, not to the abusive mother, certainly not to my mother. And if there's one thing that surviving extremely traumatic physical, emotional abuse teaches you, it's how to identify when other people are suffering from it. And I'll tell you right now, to be a member of the black community is to have a devouring mother. And it doesn't matter whether it's your biological mother or your culture, it's devouring you. Just look at the white kids that participate in the hip-hop culture. I hate saying these things. I really do. It just makes me feel like such a fucking... Like, who am I? So we're talking about magic, and we're talking about the magical worldview, and we're talking about what these people believe, right? We're talking about what the people who speak AAVE believe, but we're mostly talking about what the upper echelon of the liberal worldview believe, people like Nancy Pelosi. That 1% of the 1% who actually make decisions for the entire world. They decide how you're going to behave, how your children are going to behave, how your siblings are going to behave, how your parents behaved. They actually make the decisions, right? So in The Wicker Man, the way the mayor gets the cop to be a willing sacrifice is he lets the cop believe that they're actually going to sacrifice a girl in town, and that the girl that's gone missing is the girl that's bound to be sacrificed. So they have the cop unwittingly, unknowingly go through all of the different ritual performances that he needs to go through. He has to dance as the fool, and he has to rescue the hero, and he has to do the heroine. He has to do all these various things in order to be the sacrificial victim, in order to be the tastiest victim, in order to go to the chamber of the alien god and most please it. Because that's what you're doing. That's what you're doing when you're making a sacrifice. You're dressing a child up for marriage. And not the long-term fun part of marriage where you get to manage a rich man's estate. The part that everyone thinks marriage is now, and the reason civilized countries have abandoned marriage at an alarming rate. and in fact why we redefined marriage in the early 20th century, not as a union for procreation and the resulting of children and the proper and most efficacious raising of those children into good quality adults who can therefore be good quality citizens, who can therefore lead a good quality civilization, but in fact marriage was redefined as something entirely more abhorrent. I don't want to talk about it because this is still YouTube. I'm putting this on. I still haven't talked about magic. We're 50 minutes in and I've given a definition of magic, but this is hard stuff to talk about. This is why the books on it are so manipulative and they're so wrong and they're so unhelpful. Because if you're honest with yourself in that way that you're taught to be honest in the warrior school, and see, that's what we don't understand. I guess that's what I really need to start with. So we don't understand the three cults. We don't understand the three cults because, well, Christianity destroyed them. They hid them. Right in plain sight in the Trinity. You worship the Trinity. If you're a Christian, like you're aware of the Trinity. Three aspects of the one divine being, but you don't understand it because it's an abstraction way up the totem pole or the tower from where you reside theologically, and it's put there to keep you from it. Because what the Trinity is the Trinity is the three schools. It's the three schools of magic that make you thrice great. Trismegistus. They are the three majesties. Okay? And so the first is the warrior school. And so school is the wrong word. Cult is the right word, sort of, in our modern nomenclature. But we talked about it a little bit. The only people who were allowed to vote, say in Athens, are the only people who were allowed to participate in tribunals, or the only people who were really allowed to participate in government. Because government, the secular world was an entirely... Look, the world was very different, even as recent as 100 years ago. Just the way that it was made hierarchical. Like we've hidden hierarchy so effectively that most people will just tell you that there is no social hierarchy, but there is absolutely a social hierarchy, and there are absolutely divisions among that social hierarchy of profession and of permanence. Frankly, they're just they will always be there. They're little bubbles or pockets or whatever, and it will always be the way that it was built, because we still live in the house that the Mesopotamians built 7,000 years ago or whatever. It wasn't the Mesopotamians. Çatalhöyük is in Turkey, but whatever. Like we still live in the same house that the first civilization. Like we still live in a Stone Age civilization. That's what I'm saying. We have not updated in a meaningful way our hierarchies and our worldviews and our ideations since the Stone Age, since the Ice Age, since the damn end of the Younger Dryas period. I mean, it's been 12,000 years, and we still act and talk and think exactly the same. That's not entirely true. And it's not entirely true because of the three schools. And so the warrior school, if you were going to participate in the world, you had to survive war as a man. You had to. Because if you were going to have children, you had to survive war. Because if you were going to have a job, you had to survive war. Because if you were going to survive being a teenager, you had to survive war. Because that was a permanent reality, clear up until like the 1950s. Like, let's just be real. And it still is. It really still is. The only people who are truly competent in our secular world are soldiers. Soldiers are people who were raised by soldiers. And that's just how it always will be. Because we were talking about discipline, but there's, and we were talking about respect, but there's a third pinnacle to that triangle, to that trifecta too, and it's honor, right? And until you've been a soldier, you don't understand honor. And until you've been beaten up by a soldier because of his PTSD flashbacks, you don't understand what it means to honor anything. And we're not talking about that today. We're talking about magic. Sort of. You've heard of the Berserker. You've probably heard of Mithras, because Conan, as in Conan the Barbarian, has become pretty popular. Again. But the warrior cults were interested in preparation for death. So, they were interested in dying before dying. There's a quote. I'm trying to remember it, but it's not coming to me right now. I'm getting that Lovecraft quote. How do you kill that? Which that never dying. Whatever. I don't know. The quote about Cthulhu, and it's mixing up with this. But anyway, my point is, the cult was preoccupied with teaching you to die before you died, with teaching you to give up your life and give up any hold on any impulse or any instinct that you might have to hold on to those reins or that steering wheel or whatever, to lace up your own shoes in the course of your fate, because your fate was not your fate. And so I'm thinking pretty, I guess in my case it would be clearly, but it would be recently because of the recency bias, because I've been studying Norse mythology to try to understand why they were the way that they were. Well, the way that they were was pretty obvious. It wasn't just their religion. Their religion explained their religion prepared them for the life that was coming, right? So that's what religion does, and that's why people have abandoned Judaism and Christianity and Islam, and they've just abandoned religion in general to become spiritual, right? Is because religion gives you answers for your life as it is coming to you, right? And so the Vikings had the Norns, right? And so the Norns were the Fates, if you're aware of the Greek, right? So there are these three ladies, but every person also has a specific Norn, like a guardian angel. And those Norns determine how long your life is going to be. And so you are going to die when you are going to die in the Viking worldview. So there's none of this life prolonging or life extending or whatever sciences in the Viking age. They don't have a section of their society dedicated to trying to make people live to the fictional ages in the Bible, these 100, 200, 300, 400, 900 years. Like, there's no transhumanism. There's none of that. No hope for it. No thinking about it. Because you are going to die when you are going to die, and there is no escaping that. There's no escaping it. Like, if you read any two stories, if you read any three stories, that's the pattern. There's no escaping how you die. And that's a fact. We're all going to die. That's not what we're talking about. The Norns. And why you were going to die. And why you, as a 16-year-old male, would join this warrior cult. Well, if you've seen that movie, The Viking, that came out recently, you've seen very clearly what it looks like to be a part of that Viking cult. What they would do is they would feed you psychedelics, they would take you out, and they would let you have a psychic ego death. It's actually called an ego death. They would let you have a psychic death. They would let you experience ego death, where you thought you were dying because you thought you were poisoned. And then they would bring you back to life, and they would remake you as a bear or as a wolf or as whatever. And then they would give you a weapon, and they would say, until X time, this is what you are now. This is what you are until you die. And that's the warrior cult. And so you escape the warrior cult with no clinging to life. And so when you see things like Taoism, Lao Tzu, or you see Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, Manichaeism, like these extremely pacifist religions. These extremely pacifist religions are outpourings of the warrior cult. What they're doing is saying that you don't actually have to be a warrior to ascend to the highest degrees of the warrior cult. Because what you realize if you ascend to the highest degrees of the warrior cult, but you're not actually a warrior, is that the warrior cult, all it's doing is preparing you for death. But if you don't die, if you do in fact make it to old age, there are lessons to be learned, and there is another cult to be joined, and that cult is the cult of the woman. And so men aren't really allowed to join the cult of the woman. The cult of the woman is for women. The cult of the woman is what teaches you that you are a Pokemon, and that you are a beautiful Pokemon, and that you are going to continue to evolve into your old age. That your body is going to materially change year after year after year after year in a constant cycle that is not degradation, but is a beautification into old age and death. That's what the woman cult is. But again, we're not allowed to talk about psychosexual drama, but the woman's cult is also a psychosexual drama about a woman's different phases in her own maturation. And so there is where a girl becomes a woman, becomes a mother, becomes a grandmother, is within the confines of the cult. And this is no different today in the very legal and recognized Native American religions in North America, both of these things. Psychedelic drugs are used frequently in, how did I forget the name of this people? Oh my goodness. The Iroquois medicine and religion frequently uses psychedelic drugs, and good for them. Psychedelics are fucking awesome if you treat them with the respect that I'm talking about, with the dignity and the honor to do that thing that you're taught at the end of the warrior cult, which is to look intensely at the self. The end of the warrior cult is an intense series of self-examinations, and I didn't say that. I thought it in my mind, I didn't say it out loud. You're taught in Buddhism and in Plato, etc., everywhere that's talking to warriors at the end of their age is telling them to look at your life and at yourself and examine yourself. And then it's teaching young people to do the same. When you go today to a Zen monk and you say, what's the secret to Zen? He will say, go sit down, go close your eyes, and think about yourself. Think about your thoughts. And then he'll give you various activities to teach you how to stop doing that, because it's completely overwhelming and it will destroy you if you don't know what you're doing. And then once he teaches you to stop thinking about your thoughts, you'll realize that there is no secret. The secret is to stop thinking. You're going to die. Everything happens for its own reason. You don't need to know every reason. What you need to do is position yourself either like a stone or like a leaf in a moving stream. And that's what the Norns teach us, that you're going to die. Okay, so now that I've circled back and I've finished talking about the warrior cult twice, the women's cult teaches you how to live. Because what you need boys to do is be willing to die so that little girls can live. You need your young men to be willing to go fight and die so that your little girls, so that your young women can not do that. Die. So that they can grow up and they can go through all of those different evolutionary stages. They can be that beautiful shining Pokemon that you become at old age and death, as a grandmother and a great-grandmother and a matron to a community. Like that is beauty. That is beauty. Like this whole permanent adolescence where 60 and 70-year-old men are dressing like 70-year-old men. It is indeed now, but I meant women. 60 and 70-year-old women are dressing like 13-year-old girls and behaving that way is completely inappropriate. It's completely inappropriate. Culturally, it's completely inappropriate. It's biologically, but it is immaterial and irrelevant to what I'm talking about. Magic, in fact, is what these women are doing when they're behaving this way. They're dressing the way that they're doing. They're performing ritual magic. And it's so hard. It's so hard because I can say it and I can go, Papa, there it is. That's what they're doing. And it doesn't say what ritual magic is any more than I have already. And I haven't never really said anything at all about women's magic because the Eleusinian cult's difficult to talk about. I'm not allowed to talk about psychosexual drama. But the Eleusinian cult basically taught women that being a woman is beautiful, that you don't have to be beautiful. You can choose to be beautiful. You can choose to do that thing. But, so to speak, Hades would have loved Persephone anyway. So, like, in a sense, like, the women's cults are in a sense Wes Anderson films. They're telling you that there's a husband for every little girl, because there is, even if it means that you have to be someone's second or third or fourth or fifth wife. There's a husband for every little girl. And then, so what the Upanishads and what the Mahabharata and what the warrior cult myths are telling boys is that there's a battle for every little boy, and for every survivor, every virtuous man, there's a wife. And there may even be a multitude of wives, depending on how virtuous he was in this and previous lives. You understand? But there's a cult of virtue from both sexes. And so, like, the conservative worldview wants to maintain that cult of virtue, and the liberal worldview wants to say that there are other things that have virtue. But see, that goes to something that I don't really want to talk about because it's its own 6-part, 2-hour conversation, and how Plato was being ironic. And Plato starts at virtue and justice. What are these words? What do they mean? And the answers that he comes to are ironic. He's not serious. He's telling you that he doesn't know either. And not only does he not know either, but the words themselves, the ideas themselves might be fountains of bullshit spewing from our mouths. So what I'm saying, because I believe it's what Plato is saying, is that liberals, rich people, educated rich people that didn't have to work and didn't have to get their knowledge from wisdom, that is from experience, people who were just educated, so college-educated liberals, is exactly what Plato was talking about when he was talking about sophists, and that's why philosophy students never quite notice that. And, neither do college professors when they're talking about Plato. How would... You didn't go through the warrior cult. You were educated, right? So you don't have an intense self-examination. You don't know how to look at yourself. But see, I spoke very strong when I said that you have to be a soldier in order to do certain things. But I don't know if this remains the case, but I know that with my father's generation of soldiery, they intimately, or what was the word that I want to say? They emphatically insisted that you not think about what you were doing, and most certainly not talk about it after you had done it and after you got out. Not think about it, not bottle it all up. And that's the exact opposite of the warrior cult. So I'm assuming that the VA is not doing that anymore, mostly because, the guys you see on YouTube that are soldiers aren't like that. But they're on YouTube. These are gregarious dudes. So yeah, I talked a big game when I said you have to be a soldier to know anything today, but when you don't go through the soldier cult, you don't really know anything anyway. So that's why, that's why poor guys hang out at soldier bars to get their asses kicked by soldiers, right? And that's always been a thing too. Because if you're just a farmer, or if you didn't go to the soldier cult, or if you didn't do your soldiery, there's a certain implied lack of manliness there, lack of manhood there. And so that becomes a very, very real and very, very serious problem for Rome and all of its inheritances. I mean, that is the direct thing that destroyed the Ottoman Empire, was the Janissaries and their control over the culture. And so when liberals say that conservatives, they strangle the culture and they don't let it grow, and they're not wrong. That is what conservatism is. That is what it is to be conservative. That is what it is to conserve, is to keep what you have, because you understand that things are finite. And in a way, conservatism as an ideology for civilization is an understanding that civilization in itself is finite. But it's also a refusal to understand that time is cyclical and that civilizations end before they die, and that they die before they disappear. The civilization is constantly, especially now with the speed of communication with intercultural, not just intercivilizational, but intercultural, because we basically live in one world civilization now. We have for a very, very, very long time. There have only been, the Americas were basically a civilization. I don't know exactly how interconnected and how much communication and trade was going on, but I know that Central and South America were communicating and trading, and I know that the southern parts of the North America were communicating with Central and South America. So largely one civilization with lots of different cultures within it, lots of different societies and lots of different peoples and lots of different worldviews within it. And then the Europe, Asia, and Africa have largely been one civilization with isolated pockets for the last several thousand years. Sure, sub-Saharan Africa has been largely isolated, but I mean, you're talking about again a civilization, and then people groups within it, pockets that spring up and down, towers here and there, but they communicate, they work together. There's a even if there are rivalries and blood feuds, your definition of civilization is too limited, I think, if it doesn't include vast communities of peoples working together. So when Civilization 6 says that the United States and Spain are different civilizations, I balk at that idea. It works for a video game, but they're different cultures, they're different nations, really. And nations themselves have different cultures within them, different people groups and different worldviews and different ideologies within them, but nations belong to larger civilizations. I mean, the EU is a tacit acknowledgement of that no nation is an island into itself in the same way that no man is, right? So the UK being an island is still no island into itself. I mean, Brexit was disastrous for that people trying to just be an island into itself. I mean, what would the UK be without the United States economy? Like, without us to buy their bullshit, who else would? I wish I were being funny. That made me laugh, but it's not funny. There's so much hubris in English speaking peoples, and that's kind of what I'm talking about, I guess. Magic, that the hubris that, if you just speak one language and speak it well, you'll be able to materially change the universe, and that's what AAVE promises, to talk about what I was talking about last time a little bit. But I mean, that's what my granddad promised. If I just spoke the English language properly, they give me the pathology or the fixation on speaking properly that causes speaking improperly, or causes willful ignorance to grind my teeth in the first place. So I'm idiosyncratic, but I get my idiosyncrasies, honestly. That's what I'm saying. I get them from a place that has been largely muted and buried under, I don't know, heaps of earth. And then, well, I guess it's been dissolved in vitriol, is what I mean. Because if college students are nothing else, they're vitriolic. They spit hate like vipers spit poison. Just acid tongues, I believe, is what people, is a phrase that someone else coined. I've gone and upset myself. I've got myself so upset I don't know what I'm even talking about anymore. I've hit so many topics that I've come, like, felt like I've burned my fingers on, that I don't even want to quest out into my memory of what I've been talking about. This is an interesting practice for me. So I've been talking about liberals, and I said that they're the mayor. That they're black wizards. And then I intimated that Carthaginian child sacrifice hasn't gone anywhere, and in fact has escalated in the United States with Planned Parenthood. Let's say that in lowercase so that I don't risk being sued or whatever because of the idea of Planned Parenthood. So girls no longer... I've read 3 books. I think I've listened to 5 different lecturers and there's countless YouTube videos on the topic of, I don't know how to phrase it, on the topic of the divine feminine, but on the topic of a woman's relationship to the divine feminine, but specifically the heroine's journey. So the woman's, the inverse to the hero's journey. So if there's the hero with 1,000 faces, there's a heroine with 1,000 faces. And all of those books, I'm not a woman. I don't know if you know that about me. But none of those books is anything but pandering and wrong. They just tell girls to behave like men, but if you behave like men, you're going to be disappointed at the end of your life. So stop behaving like a man at the appropriate time for you to stop behaving like a man. That's what they all say. They don't tell you how to behave like a woman. They just say flowery, nonsensical, pandering, I guess, like the kind of things that male critics of literature used to call women's literature. Just all those hate words that they used to use for women's literature, they found it facile, they found it false, they found it shallow, They found it meaningless and pandering, and because the goal isn't to teach you, in fact, how to be a woman. The goal is, in fact, to tell you that you are okay being you just the way that you are, because that's what women need to hear, because that's what women have been telling one another forever. But the Eleusinian cult and the women cult, women's magic, is not that. It is most certainly, absolutely, 100% not that. See, colleges are obsessed with power right now, I've noticed. I notice it in large part because Jordan Peterson is confused by the topic, so he brings it up a lot, and he's always blindsided or broadsided, I suppose, when anyone brings it up in his presence. But power and its expression in power politics, that's women's magic. They're interested in that shit, and they should be interested in that shit, because what women don't have is biologically strong arms for swinging swords and spears and hitting and strangling anyone who says things that they don't like. But what they do have is vaginas. And with those, they're able to convince people that do have those arms to do that thing and those things to other people. So women are very interested in power, and they're interested in the expression of power. They're interested in power politics. They always are. They always will be. It's a biological interest. In fact, it's not a biological interest. It's a biological necessity. Jordan Peterson says it best when he says that, and girls hate hearing it, so I kind of just want to quote him because I don't like him and girls hate him. So whatever. I hate hearing him be right about this. But you're extremely vulnerable for 9 months during the pregnancy, and then again for 13 years while you're raising that child. And if that child is a girl, yeah, you're extremely vulnerable until you can pawn her off on someone else, especially if you're a single mother. And tell me that doesn't remain the case today. I mean, how many cringe memes do we need to see of teenage women, 20-year-old women, 30-year-old women, chasing their babies away from them dancing naked in front of a camera to make a little bit of money to buy formula for that baby because they don't get enough calories in order to produce the food that baby needs? Before we go, yeah, this might be a problem that might actually need to be addressed by intelligent people who care, not unintelligent people who don't care and are in fact propagating and making the problem worse by telling you that no, this is in fact women's lib. It's absurd. See, in the Middle Ages, they used to do this thing called argument ad absurdum. What they would do is they would take your core thesis and then they would just express it out to its absurdist degree. And if the absurdist thing that you could think about a thing was so absurd that it couldn't be possible, then your thing can't be possible. Well, we're at that point with the liberal worldview. I mean, look, since I recorded that last thing, I know that AA, affirmative action, that affirmative action is, has been struck down by the Supreme Court. And I know that Roe v. Wade has been whatever by the Supreme Court of the United States. But the Supreme Court doesn't actually dictate what people do. It doesn't actually dictate what people think, and it doesn't dictate what people say, right? I said those out of order again. I know. But I think that loop, what people do, is instructive of what they think, and then you can work it backward from what they say. So if it works, it's said wrong. But as a mathematics, it works. And it works up and down the abstract level, abstraction totem pole as well. Tower, pyramid, however you want to think about it. I don't remember what I just said. God damn, I'm so dumb. No, I just said something that traumatized myself again, so I ran away from it with qualifiers, didn't I? That must have been what I did. So, Liberals believe that we have a population problem. Liberals always believe that we have a population problem, because what liberals are is elites. Liberals are the rich. So when I've been doing all this talking about the rich, and I've been talking about elites, and I've been talking about nobles, and I've been talking about Aryans. Like I got distracted about Aryanism and Nazism and all that. And the reason that I went on the distraction about what it meant to be a classical rich person is the responsibility. See, that responsibility has gone nowhere. That's kind of what we're talking about, is magic. That's why I'm talking about black magic. It's hard to say why I'm talking about anything. I'm talking to myself. But I'm talking about black magic because I'm thinking about responsibility, and I'm thinking about changing words, and I'm thinking about changing worldviews, and I'm thinking about changing ideas. And see, if you think of an idea, if you take the word idea and you extrapolate it from everything that you think you know from it, and you just hear the sound idea and you let me redefine it for you for a moment. The word idea, the concept of the idea, came from Plato and his realm of forms. The ideal. So an idea isn't a thought, and it's not like, oh, I had an idea, what if we did this thing, right? That's not what an idea is. An idea isn't like a thought or a question. It's not a hypothesis. It's not an experiment. It's not that. An idea is like the perfectly formed, finished product version of anything. So like when you say, oh, I have an idea, and then you start workshopping it out, what you mean is, I've caught a glimpse at an idea. There's a finished product in what I saw or what I thought. I don't know what it is yet, so let's work out what the idea was. Because Plato's world of forms is so close. It's so close to what it actually is that it's instructive, and I can talk about it because you've heard of it, and I don't have to do anything new yet. I don't have to prove that I know what I'm doing and that I'm doing this for a reason. I'm doing this to do something new. I can just talk about things that you already know. I'm just outright talking to myself now. Like when I say you, I'm not talking to like a potential listener. I'm talking to the person that's going to have to listen back to this to edit it, now that I know that I'm doing this. So an idea is the formed thing. And so if you want to change an idea, what you have to do is you don't change it in the real-time reality that you and I live in. So, for instance, if what you want to do is you want to change the word literally, not to mean as it is written, but figuratively, you don't change it in real time. You don't like call up the Supreme Court and say, hey, the word literally should actually mean figuratively. It's inverse. What you do is you start casually using it wrong. And then you just don't stop. And then you get people around you to do it. And you say, no, it actually works. See, it's literally this. And I'm using it ironically. See, I'm using it to mean figuratively, but I'm using it artistically. Right? And so if you just misrepresent reality long enough, you can change the idea, because you can change what people perceive the idea to mean. So you can change it on the functional level. You just have to change the way enough people observe the idea in order to change the idea. But doing that is deeply insidious. That's why I keep calling it black magic. That's why I would talk so much about like skinwalkers, and that's why I've talked so much about blood sacrifice and human sacrifice and violence. Because, see, the magic that I'm not allowed to talk about, that erotic magic, that magic is about prolonging life, for the most part. There were some rituals that were pretty horrific that I'm not allowed to talk about. But those were, honestly, I genuinely think that those were as much about liberating a person who would probably not make it to adulthood on their own terms, as they were about doing a terrible thing, because human beings need to be reminded of terrible things during times of peace, because human beings do need to be reminded of terrible things in times of peace. And that's why in times of peace we'll still carry out human bloodletting. Like, we still do executions. We still have people who are professional killers. That's why we still use our soldiers on our civilianry. That's why our civilians still riot. That's why we have police. It's because peace is only with other nations. Peace is only within other nations. Peace is only with other nations. Like, civilization is never even at peace within itself at any level of the totem pole. Like, in large part, what I'm talking about now is I'm standing between the AAVE and the community, the conservative white community, and I'm saying communities, the AAVE community and the conservative white community, these two communities, and I'm saying, you're part of a greater civilization. You're at war with one another because you're neighbors, and you're not at war with anyone else. Just don't be at war. But that's a big ask of the black community, to not be at war, because it's a big ask to ask of people to assimilate who have defined their identity by anti-assimilation. So, like, black music, black clothes, black culture. If you assimilate, what is that? Well, it looks like what liberals ask for, in fact, which is, gender shifted movies, in fact, but I'm not talking about gender. I'm trying to talk about skin color and how it's ridiculous, and then speaking badly and having a bad attitude and being unteachable and unfriendly and unkind just because you have black skin is the argument from absurdity against ending Jim Crow, frankly. But that needs so much context, it just sounds like I'm being racist. Because, I did grow up in North Carolina, where I did sense that my education longed for the days of Jim Crow. So, I mean, maybe there's just a certain amount of relief in being able to say those things now because I'm faceless on the internet. But that's not true. Because if what's true about Jim Crow is that it raised the bar and it challenged black people to be white, and ending it lowered the bar and challenged them to be black, I know what I like. I know that when I play video games and when I played sport and when my pelvis wasn't destroyed and I was able to walk and bicycle for as long and whenever I felt like it, that what I wanted was to be challenged. And I know it made me better. I know it makes me better, is being challenged. Not challenged to be worse, not encouraged to be worse, but challenged and encouraged to be better by people who are better than me. And so that narcissism and that arrogance that says that nobody is better than me, I can be as bad as I want. What is that? Well, that's banditry. And banditry is a killer, is a warrior, is a soldier who never engaged in the warrior cult meaningfully. A bandit is somebody who understood the temporality of life and understood that death is waiting for all of us, but who didn't understand that defending life and defending the lives of people who can't defend their lives is the very greatest and highest calling. And that's why fathers are bailing on their children at an appalling rate. Not just because their music tells them that that's the cool thing to do, but because What incentive is there to be a father? In this civilization, what incentive is there to be a father? Sometime before 18, the mother is going to sue you for child support. And you're not going to have a relationship with that child. And she's going to poison that child against you emotionally so that you can't have a relationship with that child into adulthood. And I'm not saying that because I've watched a lot of Maury and because I grew up sitting in front of a television with Ricky Lake on it. I'm telling you that because it's something stupid like 65% of marriages end in divorce. If you're a male and you make any amount of money, especially if you had nothing, you're guaranteed to lose all of it to a woman who wants to take it because you put a baby in her. The only smart choice for a young man is to be gay. The only way to get men to be attracted to you long term as a woman is to become a trans male. But the reasons why are too appalling to say on YouTube. You'll have to pay me on Patreon. Because I won't be allowed. They'll take it down. I'm not allowed to talk about psychosexual drama. Magic is being born a girl and saying that you can be a man if you just act like you think boys act. That's what ritual magic is. It's saying if I just act in this particular way long enough, a lie will become the truth. It's Hitler. It's Hitler when he said that people will believe anything if you tell them small enough lies, frequently enough. It's exactly the same. So when I began this by saying that when I look at liberals, all I see, what I am reminded of is that these are fans of megalomaniacs, psychopaths, and, well, narcissistic serial killers. It's hard to take them seriously. And it's most certainly hard to think that joining their cult is advantageous to me. Because what they're asking me to do is be one of Manson's killers. And Manson's killers did time too. In fact, I'm not sure that Manson's killers are the ones with a fan club. Man, that's so good. That's such a great place to do like a mic drop. But I'm not done. Because I still don't like what I've talked about. I still don't like what I've said about magic. There's still meat there. I don't know how to close the gap. So it turns out that using the Wicker Man was actually the right choice because I had to stop and pause and take an emotional break. And I got to thinking about the Wicker Man and the things that I said about the Wicker Man. So the Wicker Man had to go through the hero's journey, right? And so it's a horror movie because it's an inversion of the hero's journey. So the hero of the tale is ultimately the victim of our horror tale, and there's an object lesson in that. There's an object lesson in that being righteous. I was talking about being righteous versus those other things, just, valorous, like having virtue, being just, being righteous. Like the cop was all of those things. Those things don't save you. They don't even guarantee you a good afterlife, because if the ritual worked, he's that God's plaything for eternity. He's being devoured by that thing like that painting of um, Satan in Dante's hell. Because that's who Dante's Satan was derived from, was those Celtic, specifically gods. So the object lesson is that being a white savior, right? Being a white savior is its own hell, its own torment. Because, like, if you read the King Arthur stories, I was obsessed with the King Arthur, and remain, in fact, obsessed with the King Arthur literature. I've been studying the Viking literature to better understand the King Arthur literature, because the Viking literature was produced. You'll never hear a Norse historian or specialist or whatever, and you'll never hear an Arthur historian speak to one another. Evidently, they just haven't spoken to one another, but you'll never hear them say this. But the Viking literature was produced in response to the Arthur literature, because the Arthur literature at its source, if you read the earliest Arthur literature, the Arthur literature is the Druid songs, is the Celtic pagan song and ritual captured for a Christian audience, to remember their history, where they came from, and why they don't behave that way anymore. But they very accurately represent how these people are not different, were not different. The people of the 10th, 11th, 12th centuries and before were absolutely not different from the Vikings in a lot of very key ways, but specifically the Norns and the idea of honor and a warrior's valor and worth, the worth of a man and the worth of a woman. They were highly preoccupied with the worth of a woman, and women were involved in the literature, which means that they were involved in the songs, because Marie de France, who, if I'm not mistaken, is the very daughter of Eleanor of Aquitaine, who commissioned Chrétien de Troyes to write his masterworks. Marie de France also didn't compose. She says outright in her book that she didn't compose. She just wrote down songs that had existed for centuries. All she did was bring them back to the British island, because they had migrated to France. Because the woods of Gaul, the woods of France and Germany were more conducive to hiding Druids than England. Which is interesting, because by the time the conflict that's captured in those very earliest Arthur stories happens, it's happening between the conflict is happening between a fully Christianized post-Roman Wales, effectively, and pagan Anglo-Saxons. So the story of how the Anglo-Saxons became Christian is one that I'm trying to figure out. I'm not talking about what I sat down to talk about, but I am. I'm talking about Arthur, and I'm talking about the Viking myths, and I'm talking about how they're obsessed with the worth and the value of people. And then I'm trying to prove that I also have questions to myself. I am talking to myself still. But, so the Arthur myths, they're all about the Knights of the Round Table. They're all about virtue and valor, but they're not examples of doing virtue. Frequently, like the Kabbalah, they're negative examples. So in Jewish mysticism, you don't prove God. What you do is you don't disprove God. So you don't say, well, this thing proves God. You say this thing doesn't disprove God, effectively. You use negative examples. God is not this. God is not that. God is not this. God is not that. Well, okay, well, virtue is not this. You come to your definitions through negation rather than through positive affirmation. So rather than saying that a cat... Oh, okay, so the example that Plato, I think it's Plato, the example philosophers always use is a philosopher in Greece asking what is a man, and then somebody saying, well, a man is a bipedal creature, and so he brings a chicken. The philosopher the next day brings a chicken to class, and he says, okay, so this is a man. And the guy goes, well, no, a human doesn't have any feathers or hair on it, and so they convene for the day or whatever, and then the philosopher the next day brings the chicken back, but he's plucked all of its feathers off, and he says, so this is a man. And so instead of defining things through positive attribution, plastic is blank, it's a negative attribution. It's definition through negative attribution. A bike is not a car, a bike is not a table, a bike is not a bike is not the floor. It's I've over-explained this, and I don't remember what I was talking about. Right. So the Arthur stories are defining what the culture maybe holds to be ideal, right? Like what maybe the stories are how the culture is defining virtue and justice, and how to be a Christian soldier, and how to use Christianity to advance through the ancient soldier cult, but also how to use Christianity to advance through the women's cult, but also how Christianity doesn't ignore the man's magic. And so I guess that's what I have left to talk about. Is I've kind of talked around women's magic and what it means to be a woman, and so the third thing that thrice great is what happens. So men, not all soldiers grow up to be shamans. So like not all boys grow up to be cowboys, right? But the person who performs the death cult is a man, typically. Now you can get the death cult ceremony at the Eleusinian in the women's thing, but you're mixing rituals when you do that. The person who is the dying and resurrected male, that's typically an initiate that's died and resurrected before, because the dying and the resurrecting is a little bit too traumatic to also lie in bed with a virgin next. What was I talking about? I got myself all distracted by psychosexual drama. And saying this in a way that I'm allowed to say it, so that I'm allowed to actually post this video without having to edit it too much. Because I'm lazy. No, I'm not lazy. I'm talking to myself. So anyway, Merlin, that's what I'm fucking talking about. I'm talking about Merlin, right? So, if you survive war but you're not the king, you don't have any other options than to go the third route. And that's to become an advisor to the king. And so the cult of the vizier, as it were, expresses itself in the... I believe that they're called the state exams in China, where China became a bureaucracy, like a massive civilizational bureaucracy. That bureaucracy is basically what I'm talking about. So you've got the cult of the warrior, the cult of women, and then basically the cult of institutionalized bureaucracy. But that institutionalized bureaucracy doesn't look to, say, Merlin, so let's say 6th century Arthur, right? It doesn't look the same to him, or even to Charlemagne. Let's just use an actual historical person who got caught up in the Arthur myth, if we really want to stick with the Arthur myth. Charlemagne, making myself laugh by my wanting to call him other names to impress my French and German audience that I don't have. Bureaucracy to Charlemagne looked very different even than maybe what bureaucracy to Nebuchadnezzar would look like. So Nebuchadnezzar's bureaucracy looked like Jews. Well, that's frankly not what Charlemagne's. That's not at all what Charlemagne's bureaucracy looked like. But what it looked like before the Christians was people who were astronomers and mathematicians and what are architects called? Architects and masons and skilled laborers, people with extremely specialized knowledge. And so the third cult was the person who either like knew a bunch of those skills, a polymath, or the person who was the leader of those type of people. So like a person who, well, it would become Freemasonry, right? So like Freemasonry and the post after the it would be more instructive rather than calling it Freemasonry or likening it to Freemasonry first. It would be more instructive to liken it to the Knights Templar, because most people know what the Knights Templar are and what they did. And so after the Knights Templar, the reason so many people think that the Knights Templar are in fact the Freemasons is because the Freemasons just did that thing. So like basically what I'm saying is like the cult of bureaucracy is the cult of gentlemen's club, is the cult of leisure. And so like if you don't know what the word leisure means, let's talk about it, because I know you don't. The word school, skoleo, and the Greek of Plato means leisure. And so in order to have leisure time, leisure doesn't mean sitting around and doing nothing. Leisure is a different kind of work. So we were talking about being rich, and we were talking about those responsibilities. Well, as a rich person, you were also expected to have leisure. That was one of your responsibilities. And so that means, in modern parlance, in modern words, so dumb. What leisure means is adult education. So you were responsible as a rich person, not just for doing the thing that made you rich and being really good at the thing that made you rich, but you were also expected to learn other things. And you were expected to become a master in multiple skills by the end of your life, not just the skill that made you rich. So like, I remember my generation, I was born in 1987, I graduated in 2005. So my generation of people all laughed when they learned that George W. Bush had become a painter, had decided to paint in his old age. And it's like, well, what else is he supposed to do? Like, being retired as a rich person doesn't just mean being retired and going out on the boat like it does, every weekend, or going golf in the middle of the week like it does being a retired laborer. Like, making it to 55 and having a healthy enough body to enjoy, and having, frankly, enough money saved up to enjoy retirement as a middle class or as a laboring person. Yeah, there's no expectation, no requirement of leisure. You're just expected to enjoy that you didn't die and that your body works, and enjoy your family. It's a reward. But as a rich person, you're supposed to do leisure, and leisure is adult education. That means acquiring new skills. It means learning how to paint after you've already been the president of the United States. It means learning skills that you're not good at and that you've never been good at, and it means learning to master them. It doesn't mean dabbling in them. I'm real bad about dabbling. I'm really bad about dabbling. But I'm also poor, and I was never allowed to experiment with what I might be good at. In fact, I was always told that I wasn't good at anything, and I wasn't allowed to develop any kind of skill or any kind of practice time or regiment. But that's a different thing. That's being poor. So being poor, if you dream about elevation and you dream about skills that will elevate you in an impractical and idealized way, you'll remain poor forever. But if you focus on those skills and those things that will elevate you from poverty, you can actually, in a sense, escape. You can remove yourself from poverty and not be hunted down to return to it. What does that have to do with magic? Well, in a lot of ways, magic Magic is that religion I was balking about when I was talking about that 15% tithe, right? When you're sitting atop the women's in the bureaucratic circles, let's say, when you're sitting at the top of those schools, you're responsible for a huge number of people and an absolutely absurd amount of wealth. Not just material wealth, as in houses, cars, bookshelves, books, the actual liquid money that flows through the economy, but you're also responsible for a huge number of livestock, the actual earth itself. So I recently read a book about the King Arthur myths that was broadly wrong about everything that it said, but it was trying to attribute the Arthur myths to the Celtic worldview and to the idea of the wasteland as it's captured in T.S. Eliot's poem of that same name that anyone who's read The Gunslinger became obsessed with in high school. What I should have said is read Stephen King's Dark Tower series, but it was The Gunslinger that I read 4 or 5 times because it was the only one that I could find that got me interested in that poem in the first place. In large part because I don't even think the poem shows up in the book. I don't think the poem shows up until the book The Wasteland, but I think that if I remember right, I might have been having read The Wasteland immediately after. It doesn't matter. I became obsessed with T.S. Eliot in high school. Everybody did, I think. No. Nobody else in my school did, but I think that every high school had a kid like me in it. There are too many people that like Lovecraft and have liked Lovecraft over the... What's that word when you're talking about over the average? Why do I have agaric, like fly agaric? Anyway. Magic. And how sitting atop those, you're constantly... When you're sitting atop those circles, you're constantly responsible. In addition to all this life, you're responsible for the worldview, and you're responsible for the mental health. So you're responsible for the well-being of these lives, but you're also responsible for the mental health of these lives. And so when I was trying to wrap up, because I saw that I was a minute or an hour and 45, and now I'm no longer trying to wrap up. I've caught this thought. What I was trying to say is that the 20th century, when they say postmodern, neoliberal, postmodern, post-Marxist, neoliberal, what they're talking about, what that means in simple language, is that thing that I just said. Man, it's really hard for me to say this out of a mic. It's got me all tripped up. What it means to be postmodern neoliberal is it means to work to reject your ancient responsibilities. So I've said it badly, and I'm going to keep saying it. To be rich is to have a responsibility to the poor, and it's not to have the bleeding heart responsibility of, oh, it must not be fun to be poor. No, it's your responsibility to make sure that the poor have homes, the poor have food, and the poor have education for their children so that their children can escape poverty. Because poverty is not, in fact, a result of your personal goodness, let's say. It's not a result of any sort of injustice that you've committed. It's not a result of your personal lack of valor or your personal lack of honor. Poverty very often is a matter of circumstance, and it's very usually the result of the people that you hang out with. That's why poor people are so often told to manage who your friends are, and why boys especially are like, well, you shouldn't have hung out with them. You know, the bad influence thing that they used to say to kids that they don't say so much anymore because that blames other people's parents. because it's the truth. Because we're one civilization, we're all one community, whether you know it or not. You and your child affect, in a butterfly effect, people in China, people nowhere near you. If I'm speaking to myself and a Chinese person hears it, they're like, yeah, of course I'm affecting someone in China. I live in China. But you understand what I'm saying. Also, your English is really good if you're listening to me talk like this, because I'm sure I'm doing a lot of muttering. So, A+, Chinese person who took umbrage with me saying that. Because it really does take a village. And this, I guess in a lot of ways what I'm saying is that the AAVE, the black community, the failing of our schools, the continued tanking of our economy, the lack of, the stagnation of wages for workers over the last 70 years or whatever it's been, like, these things are because rich people have rejected their responsibilities to their constituents, to their poor. So what they've done is they've made the government responsible for the poor. Because see, the rich people, the only way it used to be possible to be rich was to be a member of the bureaucrat cult. And you had to be a high level member. Because sure, you could be a clerk. You could be a copywriter for a magazine, but that doesn't mean that you make decisions about what the magazine publishes, right? And so what the ultra wealthy have done is they've decided that because they no longer have a class of serfs, and they no longer have outright slaves, what they have is wage slaves, that what they would do is they would change our understanding of virtue, and they would change our understanding of the fate, right, of your individual norm that determines the outcome of your life ahead of time for you. They would change that to mean that your present circumstances are a result only of your choices, and that there is no free will. Or rather, that will is, in fact, so free that wills don't tangle up with one another. That this life is so much a simulation that your life doesn't actually affect another person's. Unless, because they also have to account for liberals being or not liberals, but they have to account for libertarians being in the room. Unless, of course, you decide that you're going to kill someone. But even that, a true liberal would tell you is just a thing that happened. And that you did, and that you don't owe recompense to the world for it because you were able to come to a good reason why you did it. But see, that rejection of responsibility, that is to be a child. And that's what a liberal is. And that's what it is to be a very, very rich person in this world, is to be a child. And see, there's a reason for that as well, and it's also magical, and it's about imitation, and it's about ritual. This is what we're talking about. We're talking about magic, we're talking about ritual, and we're talking about imitation. We're talking about putting on imaginary invisible clothes, right? And so the reason that the emperor is naked and that he's wearing invisible imaginary clothes isn't because it's just a funny story and it's interesting to tell stories about tailors that manipulate people. It is, in fact, interesting to tell stories about tailors that manipulate people, Gucci and Prada, etc. But that's not what that story is about. That story is about pretending to be someone you're not, right? Whenever you put on clothes, you put on a costume. We said that. We talked about that a little bit when we were talking about self-respect, and how you dress. And that people look at you and they think things about you based on how you're dressed that could be completely wrong. Because dress is a costume. Because dress is in a lot of ways, dress is a uniform, right? Like, the reason that young people dress the way they do is to look young, is to distinguish themselves from their parents. But by the time they're parents, they realize, oh shit, I dress like my parents. And it's not because you dress like your dad, it's because you're dressing in the clothes, the way the clothes are designed to be worn. It has nothing to do with looking like your dad. It has everything to do with participating in civilization properly. And then when you find yourself participating in civilization properly and the uniform fits and it feels right, it's like, well, right, because it was designed to feel nice. It's designed, like, it is designed. Our civilization is designed to feel good, to feel righteous, and to feel just, and to feel virtuous, to have a child and a spouse and, an extra car, one more car than what you need, and one more acre of land than what you need, and one more bedroom than what you need, and maybe one more, square 10 footage of living room than what you need, and maybe like a bigger television than what you need, maybe even two TVs that are bigger than what you need, and maybe as you know what I'm saying? Do you hear what I'm saying? Because that's prospering. Having more than what you need is prospering. And we used to thrive on prospering, but now what we have to do is wear the mask of prospering. We have to mantle, like, don the clothing of prospering. We have to take out loans, and we have to pretend to be doing better than we are for people that we don't even like, and we don't care what they actually think of us. We do it for ourselves because we think we are less if we don't have more, which is insane. And that's what I'm talking about when I talk about AAVE. You're telling me that your language is equally as valid as a language that took thousands of years to evolve. Your language that you made up over the course of a couple of centuries is equally valid. That's insane. But the magic is in telling it to children and then ritually performing it on television and in movies over and over and over again, so that children are unable to distinguish the fiction from the truth. You create a black entertainment television. You call it black movies. You gatekeep and say that's black hairstyles. Only black people are allowed to do these things. And after several centuries of being polite, it hasn't been several centuries of being polite, but at this rate, anyway, after several decades of being polite, it just becomes true. It's not true. White people wore dreads. Why shouldn't white people be able to dread their hair? Why shouldn't Chinese people be able to dread their hair? That's frankly just silly. It's nonsense. Braids? Are you kidding me? Black people aren't the only people that didn't like washing their hair. Whatever. It's not about that. It's about the magic. And see, if you say it, it's a spell. It's a magic. And especially if you tweet it. If you write it down, it's magic. It's a spell. Literally, that's what the word means. The word, a magic spell, and to spell this word correctly, those words they're the same etymological word. They're the same word. That's not like a case of where two words just happen to sound very similar thousands of years ago, and then they just became the same phoneme today. No, same word, same etymological phoneme. It means the same thing. Spell this correctly, and to cast a spell means to cast a properly spelled word. And words are words of power, so women are obsessed with power, right? I was talking about that a little bit. And power. Words are powerful. And so if your words mean nothing except for the words that mean something, the words that mean something are powerful. And that's why they're always just saying mean things. Liberals. That's why everything that comes out of their mouth is just ugly. That's why I'm not allowed to talk about psychosexual drama. Because I could talk about psychosexual drama without making it erotic and without making it something that's going to make your teenager want to try it. But somehow liberals can't keep pornography out of books for children. Because there are no barriers. Because once you give yourself over to that sub or cross liminal space, you no longer exist. So once you enter pact or enter communion with an entity, which is the goal of dark magic, as we said, the goal of black magic is to control the fire itself. So you don't have power, but it has infinite power and you have power over it, right? That's the goal of black magic. That's the goal of sorcery. That's the goal of being a senator. That's the goal of being a wife. Like, these are the goals. Is maybe you don't have personal power, but this thing has power and you have some amount of control or power over it. Because control and power are different things. And once you enter that compact, your will becomes its will. Because what you want is for it to do the things that you want it to do. And in order for it to do that, you have to do what it wills. And so that means that you stop existing on the line of your choices and your actions, and it takes over. So that means, for example, if you choose that life is too difficult to wake up in the morning without smoking this weed, I can't go to work without smoking this weed, I can't be around those people sober, you're possessed by the spirit of that weed, and your life ends at that choice. Your life is over. Now it's the weed's life. And I can tell you, I've lived that. But that's what they mean. So when Jesus went around healing demons as a white wizard, he wasn't fucking doing the exorcist, pee spitting, all that nonsense. There was all of that in the ritual of the passion play of the exorcism ritual. Acting crazy and like it hurts. But it does. If you watch a real exorcism, especially somebody who's maybe going through the motions, they'll tell you after, they may even tell you during, I've watched a lot of these, that they feel dumb, but that they can't stop themselves from doing it. It's a compulsion. And then, psychologists will tell you that it's just play acting, that they're just doing what they think that they're supposed to do. But there's something neurological. It's psychosomatic for sure, but there's something going on when you let go of something that you really love. It's really painful to say, okay, I'm going to engage in life sober, for example. Not everybody can handle it. Not anyone, most people shouldn't. I'm going like 1% of 1% of people should handle life sober. Our ancestors didn't. Like, what's his name? He did the great lecture course about how your mind is tricking you. He does the Skeptic's Guide to the Galaxy podcast. Stephen Novella. Stephen Novella says as a negative that at every time and every place humans have been able to turn something into an intoxicant, they have, and gladly. But he says that like a negative. But frankly, being sober is a fucking curse for most people. Because you haven't learned how to self-examine. Because you haven't learned how to die. Because you haven't learned how to dissociate from that voice that's constantly talking to you. That voice that is what I'm doing right now. And see, I guess I need to be wrapping up, so I guess I'll talk about why I did this and why I'm doing it. I learned how to dissociate from this voice when I was a teenager. When I was a teenager, I fell deeply into Zen meditation, and I loved it, and I got very good at it, and I got very good at not thinking my thoughts and not feeling my feelings and not being present in my life. And then I turned 35, I turned 30, and I realized that no one else was present in my life. My ex-wife was gone. The woman that I thought was the one was gone. My job that I only had to support her was gone. My friends were gone. Because I wasn't present. Because I was only there to act as oracle, to speak, prophet, to speak when spoken to. And so these thoughts and these long explanations, they build up. Basically I'm thought, speech, constipated. I listen to people talk about things that they can't understand because they don't have the time. Well, I had the time. I wasn't present in my life, so I sought out the answers, and then you go and you try to share them to people, and it's too traumatic. So you have to talk to yourself. Thanks for listening.